Hi, I'm Jamie. I literally, my slide says, here is my awkward introduction. That's me, the second from the right with my brothers. But I'd like to talk a little bit about, like you mentioned, some of my experiences working with creative communities online, working with the internet, and then over the last 7 or 8 years, very specifically working with selling online video as part of VHX, and then what really brought me to Kickstarter and trying to really support the arts, thinking about what we can do, how things have changed, and kind of zoom out a little bit. This is a little personal for me, but also trying to tie it into some of these kinds of larger sort of macro trends and these things that I now have kind of a direct responsibility to help. In 2007, I helped create this website, Know Your Meme, started in some funny videos. So much of this was, as part of our job, spending our time deeply exploring how internet communities work and sort of what are the trends that you're seeing with internet communities that we can kind of draw lessons from the past. Like we try to generally sort of think of the internet as being very unique, and it is in very many ways, but there's so many lessons that can be learned from sort of studying the proliferation of print and radio and television and sort of all these trends that have come before us. So, and then it turns out that lots of other people liked studying internet memes online and making these funny videos, and it's become kind of a popular website. So before I got involved with crowdfunding, I worked with along my collaborator Casey Pugh on a crowdsourcing project where we took the original Star Wars film and chopped it up into 15-second clips and then invited the internet to come help us recreate it. And then we stitch it back together and we made this kind of chaotic tapestry that rarely represents sort of the creativity of the internet consciousness. And I really wish I'd done a Kickstarter campaign for this because we ended up losing quite a bit of money. It was just a labor of love. It was something we enjoyed doing. But we, in 2010, we actually ended up winning an Emmy for interactive media design, which was my first lesson in how important it is to apply in unpopular categories. I've also spent kind of my night job over the last decade as working with this group of an online art collective called the FAT Lab, the Free Art and Technology Lab. And our motto was release early, often, and with rap music. Kind of working at the juncture of popular culture and free culture. And it's a group of kind of artists and engineers and programmers and designers, and thankfully one lawyer too, because the logo is the NBC logo. But the bird is facing the other direction, so it's totally different. And as part of working with the FAT Lab, I actually got to be in sort of the behind the scenes as a creator on a lot of Kickstarter campaigns, including working with Max and Rosanna from BackerKit on Diaspora, a project called the iWriter. And so not only have I kind of gotten experience actually making the things, but kind of serving the community in kind of this process of raising money online and kind of seeing something through, which can be quite difficult, and I think it informs a lot of what I want to talk about. So then this brings me to kind of what I was doing just before Kickstarter, where it was VHX, and it was, hey, let's sell videos on the internet. And the idea was to create something that's kind of like Shopify, but for online videos. So it's white label, you sell from your own website, you have a direct relationship with your fans. We spent 6 or 7 years really bootstrapping this, raised some venture capital, which ties in with where I'm going. It's the foreshadowing. And that kind of begets this cycle of us kind of mutating through what we were working on, where we started helping people sell individual sort of films and comedy specials from their own websites, and then worked with like a bunch of famous people, and this is the ones I usually mention, where we worked with like Dave Grohl and Aziz Ansari and This American Life. But kind of more importantly for me personally, we worked with thousands and thousands of small creators who really had no way of breaking into the traditional film and television ecosystem. And so for them, really selling directly on the internet was the only way this was going to happen. And honestly, like when I came in on Monday morning, I wasn't like thinking, how do I get some celebrity to sell something on the internet? It was way more about how can we help the little guys out there and the people who are really struggling, who really have like a dream. They're doing this on the side, like the way I've been doing all my projects on the side. And how can we help people kind of make a living? And this was it. You could roll your own Netflix. We moved up through this complex ecosystem, multi-platform across 10 devices. Like Netflix has hundreds, thousands of engineers. This is like a non-trivial problem. And but we found that it was really incredibly hard to repeat individual successes. So people would make one film and sell it with us, and then wouldn't necessarily. So we started kind of veering towards these subscription models and really went all in on subscriptions, and really trying to kind of find a way, honestly, for us to survive as a business and really be able to make payroll and eventually kind of like satisfy our investors and our shareholders and really all the trappings of success that we kind of normally think about. And when I talk about the little creator, this is one of my favorites. Her channel is called Yoga with Adriene. She was based in Austin, Texas. She was a yoga teacher, and she started a YouTube channel, and her philosophy is very much about kind of like, let's do yoga together, and then let's go get some pizza and beer, which is like my kind of yoga. And she really kind of built up that audience. This is a story that's, I'm sure, so familiar to everybody in this audience, but really built up that audience like one person at a time, and eventually started working with us and sort of selling her videos online, has a yoga channel with us. But this, and this really represented like who we wanted to enable. And the reality was that there was just not as many of them as we would have liked. It was a struggle, really, honestly, to find people who had kind of this unique mix of both creative talent as well as kind of, they could be on camera, they could be behind the camera, they could kind of know how to market themselves, how to build up a community, know how to sustain it. And so growth has this kind of this way of, or the demands of growth have this way of really skewing how we were directing the business. And so this was another really big deal for us, like another, like talking about these big celebrity projects. Worked with Lionsgate and Kevin Hart to launch his comedy network called Laugh Out Loud. And this was where the needs of sort of chasing revenue really took us, was towards these bigger and bigger deals that would, it was not, it kind of came in with this philosophy that there'd be 1 million, independent creators who could really make this work. But what we found was, especially with video, with sort of like the comparison with Netflix and HBO, and sort of just the dynamics of the space, how the market was moving, we really had to kind of focus the business down on sort of fewer deals, bigger deals. And this experience of kind of seeing myself kind of drawn towards these larger and larger deals is part of this. This is my attempt at having like air quotes in a slide. I don't know if it's working, but this was mentioned earlier too. Like we had this. This was the persona that we were coding for. Was what we called the creative entrepreneur, and this was the kind of the profile that we felt was best equipped to sell things online. And this is like a unicorn. I have regrets about really, like with businesses, I feel like it's so important to kind of tell this story about what you're doing and what you're working on, and simplifying it down, which is great because you have a reference point you can keep coming back to, but you can oversimplify it. And I feel like this is what we did. And this is the person who is equal parts creative genius and internet marketing wizard, and seems to have 140 hours in the day. And I've seen it myself. Like it's way harder than it looks, and in so many ways you're really kind of going it alone. And I know about myself personally too that I work much better with a team. I have just loads of flaws, and having people around me that can kind of help offset, where I'm stronger, where I'm weaker. You can have, the creative brain and the business brain, and there's so many different kinds of ways of assembling it. But it's kind of like, when we boil it down to this archetype, we're really losing a lot of the nuance that can help make people successful. So this is, what led me to Kickstarter in some ways. And even talking about this creative entrepreneur should be no stranger to the model of the persona that you see so often kind of running a Kickstarter campaign. And so many of those skills are exactly what's required of somebody who is running a Kickstarter campaign and raising funds. You need to come in with a great idea, but you also need to be able to kind of get people to back it, and then you need to be able to actually manufacture it and do that in a timely fashion while you're communicating with people. It's very difficult. And so I've worked on a few campaigns, like I mentioned, and I'm always amazed by how much more work it is than we thought it would be. And this is a big part of why I took the job, is thinking about what could we do to try to make this process easier to some extent? How can we help make people more successful? But another huge reason why I took the job is that Kickstarter is a public benefit corporation. And this was a thing I'd kind of heard about but wasn't very deeply familiar with before I kind of came in. And it's, you could think of it as somewhere in between a nonprofit and a for-profit, where it's committed to a mission of supporting creativity. This idea of we help bring creative projects to life. Like, Kickstarter is the only company that I can actually remember the motto of, we bring creative projects to life. I've been saying this for like 10 years since the company started, that I could barely even remember my own mottos. And this commitment really existed from the beginning. Kind of, there's a commitment that the company will never be sold or never go take itself public, and that it is more important to be supporting creativity than it is to be returning money to shareholders. And I think this ties in with these natural incentives, and that's kind of what I want to focus on. This is hard. This is complex. It's a lot easier to focus on revenue. It's a lot easier to focus on like daily active users. It's a lot it is much harder to think about the trade-offs that you're making when you are focusing on revenue and sort of what you can do with the ecosystem as a whole. But it also provides us a lot of freedom. It provides us with the freedom to kind of resist the typical expectations of a business and to do things that we think are good for creators, even if it's not going to make us money. So I'm new to the job. I really just signed up a few months ago, but I find this incredibly compelling for me personally. This is something that so much of what I did in kind of like my side jobs, my night jobs, whatever, being able to bring that into my professional life and really thinking about how we can help creators is very exciting for me. So those financial incentives that I kind of keep mentioning are so powerful. They really skew your decision making, whether it's kind of very explicitly or more just implicitly, like when you're thinking about writing that letter to your investors. They always, you got to report on how the business is going, and you want the graph to look good. And whether or not they're kind of telling you like it's time to fix your operating margins, it's time to turn on the gas. There is this expectation that you're going to create something that is revenue generating. So I look at this now. So I am getting older and are debatably more professional, but that's not what this slide is about. This is about something that I first really started understanding with Know Your Meme, and that I feel like I've seen over and over again throughout my adult life, where as a format itself and or a medium, let's say, evolves over time, it kind of starts out at first as a wide open playing field and a big, usually amateur mess. And over time, it kind of moves through the cone of uncertainty until it becomes what my friend described as its mecca form, where it's maturation. And again, you saw this like with film and radio and television, print. You see this with online platforms like YouTube. You see it with Etsy. And of course, you're going to see it also with Kickstarter. So now that the platform is about 10 years old, there's been hundreds of thousands of campaigns. Even online commerce in general has become more sophisticated. You see that in the same way that kind of films over time, when you look at the length of a film 100 years ago, it was all over the place. Like, they'd be 20 minutes, some of them would be like 400 minutes. And then over time, it's kind of evolved that the typical film is 90 minutes plus or minus 10 minutes. We've seen sort of the same thing, where it's sort of the self-reinforcing loop of discovering what's successful, sharing that with your friends, propagating that out. It becomes a self-reinforcing loop. And you see people, it's exactly this, that they're figuring out the format and really making it work. And in so many ways, this is a positive. This is allowing people to raise more money than ever. This is returning more money into the hands of creators and artists. But when you think about the ecosystem as a whole, you have to really think about sort of some of the side effects. So this is a graph. There haven't been a lot of graphs today. And this is a pretty dense one, so please bear with me momentarily, where I don't necessarily know how well known this is, even though all the data on Kickstarter is public, around sort of some of the categories that are growing phenomenally over the last 2 or 3 years versus some of the ones that are not. And this is a graph that was compiled by John Leland, who's out here in the office somewhere, in the audience somewhere, as part of a report that he wrote called The Agony of Success, where it talks about this correlation that we've seen between the growth of these individual sorts of categories, where we have over here design, technology, games, comics, crafts, versus down here in the bottom right, it's kind of music, theater, film, dance, kind of some of these more arts, culture kinds of categories versus things that produce more generally kind of like physical goods. And on the y-axis over here, what we're looking at is actually these projects have a harder time getting funded. They're generally hitting 105% of their goal, 101% of their goal. And a lot of the money is coming in really at the last minute too. Like even just the process of the 30 days or 60 days of running the campaign is more difficult for some of these categories. And it's a separate graph, but they also have lower rates of repeat creators, people doing more than one project. And I want everything to look like this. I want everything to look like this quadrant up here, where we want to see success across all of these categories. Like, why are some of these categories and creators in these categories having a harder time with these experiences than in others? Like, and then, as the platform, you take a step back. What can we do to help with this? What can we do differently? Like, if people are figuring out this format, consumers are kind of coming in one direction. What makes these more difficult? There's tons of theories tossed around. What makes these other ones, arguably easier? It's not actually easier in reality, but this is a problem that I've kind of been thinking about a lot, and that Kickstarter has been thought about for a long time. And so I'm still really learning the ropes, but one of the things it ties in with, again, is sort of like this natural gravity that we saw with VHX, that a normal business would not worry about the graph that I just showed you. I think that they would lean into what seems to be growing and build everything for the categories that are growing and are bringing in the money. And this is not necessarily like a function of malice or anything or morality. It's really just a function of the system that we're in and this capitalist system that we all subscribe to, where the incentives are something where you're returning money back to your investors. And this is something that I experienced firsthand with VHX too. And so coming back to it, it's really focusing on what can you do to help all creators. Our goal is to bring creative projects to life across all categories, not necessarily just in the ones that make us money. And that's built into the company structure. It's built into everything that we're doing, that we have to do more, that we can do more. And again, no individual is at fault. It's the system, it's all these other things that are coming in, but the public benefit charter means that we can spend our time and energy on the things that we believe in, even if they don't necessarily produce more money. So this is like showing the age thing again. Underdog. My model of the creative entrepreneur that we were using is too simple. Creators really come in all shapes and sizes, with different levels of proficiency, with different levels of expertise in the space. Some of them are producing physical goods, digital goods, maybe in a vocal event. Like, all these things have these different dynamics at play where there is no single explanation for why any given sort of format or category might do better than others. But how can we kind of, that graph, that trend that I saw, makes, what can we do to kind of be better supporting these other things? Like, as the format has kind of come into maturation, we sort of see these trends baking in, like, maybe we should try something else. So here's some of the things that we're thinking about. So at Kickstarter a couple months ago, we launched a subscription platform called Drip. It's still in private beta. We're still kind of working through it. But this is really leaning into this idea that there is more than one way to do patronage. And that, as Patreon has kind of shown, it's been great for people who make things in a specific, in certain kind of styles, rather than kind of raising all the money at once with one big campaign. So one of the things that we launched actually just yesterday morning is a program called Patrons, where, again, John Leland is killing it. The idea is to bring institutional and backers to Kickstarter as a platform. And so the Knight Foundation, kind of talking about like things like the Utah Film Society, or all these other organizations that typically are kind of only supporting the artists that sort of have the time and expertise to actually apply for these grants. Like, let's go bring them onto the platform, and we'll point them out some projects, and we can help them support these categories that are having like a harder time. And as you think about this, and the idea of even subscriptions too, and this idea that the medium really shapes the message in so many ways, and that the platform's design itself sort of lends itself into other things, like, why don't we, one idea we keep kicking around is even around like private grants. Like, this is, again, this is like a format that hasn't been touched by a lot of internet companies, and it's something that could be made much easier, and both Kickstarter, Drip, very public. A lot of the people that I know, again, they're amazingly creative, but not necessarily the best promoters. And so maybe we can kind of create something that would make that a little bit easier. Other ideas, we're working on a version of the public API that I think will really allow us to kind of tap into the third-party ecosystem in a way that we haven't really done historically. And so what else could we do to really help people out? So my next slide was this really bad clip art graphic of someone pointing, of a hand pointing at the audience. You saw that flashing up there. So that's like the obligatory, like, what can you do to help out? Like, what is my call to action for you? There's the obligatory, continue to create awesome projects, continue to support awesome projects, but more specifically, we're spending an enormous amount of time really thinking about the platform, about new platforms, about what else we could do. And so if you have ideas, I am all ears. If you would like to beta test things, please let me know. My contact information would be on the slide that's up here. We're also hiring. I should mention that too. If this is something that excites you, as much as it excites me, or something you're interested in, we're, across pretty much every job you can think of. For me specifically, it's kind of in product and design and engineering, but we're hiring, so bring it on. Hey, that's my contact info. So, thank you very much.